What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue here with my 2024 college football schedule preview and projected record series. Up next are the Ole Miss Rebels before we preview this team's schedule for 2024 and give them an early projected record based on how tough their schedule is. Let's take a look back at what Ole Miss did in 2023. Here were my projections and predictions last year for the Ole Miss Rebels. You can see my projection for them was 8-4, and then my prediction for them was also 8-4 last year. But Ole Miss did a lot more better than that compared to my projections and predictions. This team went 10-2 last year. Again, we're basing this off of the regular season in 2023. But if you count their bowl game victory against Penn State in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, this team went 11-2 last year overall in 2023. But again, this is based off of the regular season. So they're coming off a 10-2 record from last year. Here was the schedule last year for Ole Miss in 2023, and you look at their non-conference schedule. They had to play Mercer, Tulane on the road, Georgia Tech at home, and then of course ULM Monroe. So they had a pretty tough non-conference schedule when you count Tulane and Georgia Tech in there. The Tulane game was a 10-point win, and then that Georgia Tech game, they kind of took care of business in that game as well. So that was the non-conference schedule. Then you look at their two losses last year, coming to both to Alabama and Georgia, the two teams that made it to the SEC championship last year. And they had to play both of these teams on the road, two very tough places to play, especially on the road in the SEC. Alabama, the game wasn't a blowout, but they just couldn't really move the football in that game. And then the Georgia game, that game was obviously a blowout. So Ole Miss coming off those two losses last year, but this is a team that still got the 10 wins last season in 2023. Let's now look ahead to 2024, and here's the schedule for Ole Miss in 2024. Before we go game by game and preview each and every single individual game here on this schedule for the Rebels, let's take a look at who Ole Miss will play in the non-conference. Again, no divisions, of course, in the SEC. So here's their non-conference schedule. They will play Furman, Middle Tennessee. They will play Wake Forest on the road and Georgia Southern here in the non-conference. So that's their non-conference schedule. The non-conference schedule is not too bad, but when you got Wake Forest there on the road as a Power 5 team, that makes the non-conference schedule a little bit tough. But other than that, I think this is a pretty favorable non-conference schedule for Ole Miss. And again, it's a little bit tough there when you got Wake Forest on the road. But other than that, 3 cupcake games left here on this schedule in the non-conference for Ole Miss. Let's now go back to the original schedule here for the Rebels, and let's go game by game now and preview each and every single individual game on this schedule for Ole Miss. And they will start things off here with Furman on August 31st, and then after that it's Middle Tennessee here on September 7th. So they do start out with 2 cupcake games here on August 31st and September 7th. And then after that, there's that big game on the road at Wake Forest here on September 14th. Wake Forest is a team I do expect to kind of, a little bit of a turnaround this year, but they weren't really good last year. It was kind of a bit of a step back for Wake Forest. This team went 5-7 last year, missed out on a bowl game. That game will be, of course, on the road there on September the 14th. Then it's Georgia Southern here on September 21st, so Ole Miss will play their 4 non-conference games here in the first 4 weeks of the season. There's a really good chance that Ole Miss could start out 4-0, maybe 3-1, depending on what happens in that Wake Forest game. And then after that, they open up SEC play here against Kentucky at home on September 28th. Kentucky is another program I do expect to turn it around this year. Kentucky added some pieces in the transfer portal. That's really huge for them, and Ole Miss definitely added some pieces in the transfer portal as well. So I think this game will come down to whoever has the best transfer portal class. And then Ole Miss gets to the month of October. They will play South Carolina here on the road on October 5th. Going to be a very tough place to play on the road at South Carolina, and then it's on the road at LSU here on October 12th. So you got back-to-back road games here in the first 2 weeks of the month of October at South Carolina and LSU. That's definitely a very tough back-to-back here if you're an Ole Miss fan. And then after that, they get their first bye week here of the season. Then it's Oklahoma here on October 26th. This will be a home game here for Ole Miss. Of course, Oklahoma, one of those newcomers in the SEC this year. That game will be, of course, on October 26th. And then they play on the road here at Arkansas to open things up here in the month of November on November 2nd. Then there's that rematch with Georgia here on November 9th. Of course, the game was not even close last year. But this time, Ole Miss will play Georgia here at home on November 9th, and then they get a bye week after that Georgia game. Then it's Florida here on the road on November 23rd. Going to be another very tough game here on the road for Ole Miss, but maybe you can kind of expect Ole Miss to be the favorite in this one. on November 23rd. And then after that, they close things out here with the rivalry against Mississippi State here in the Egg Bowl on November 30th. And instead of being on a Thursday this year, they will switch this thing back up to being on a Saturday. So that's the schedule for Ole Miss in 2024. When I look at this schedule, it's definitely a tough one when you got some tough road games. It starts with that Wake Forest game on September 14th, and then you got back-to-back road games here with South Carolina and LSU in the month of October, and then you got some other tough road games at Arkansas and Florida, which are not going to be very easy games here for Ole Miss. But let's now get to the projection here for this Ole Miss team. And again, this is not my official prediction. This is simply a projection based on how tough the schedule is for Ole Miss. And this is the scale I use here for my projections. If it's a 1% game in the red, these are games where Ole Miss has no chance of winning. 20% games in the orange. There'll be about a couple touchdowns of underdogs in the orange of that 20% category. Then in the yellow, the 40% category, these are games where Ole Miss will be a heavy underdog in by about a touchdown. 50-50 games will stay in the white. Games that can go either way. 60% games in the purple. These are games where Ole Miss is going to be favored by at least a touchdown. 80% games in the blue, about a couple touchdowns, and then 99% games in the green. These are the easy wins here for Ole Miss. Games that are going to be favored by more than 3 touchdowns. And that's the percentage that we're going to start here for Ole Miss. So let's start with the 99% games here, the easy wins for Ole Miss in 2024. And I think you got 3 of them on this schedule. It's your cupcake games, Furman, Middle Tennessee, and Georgia Southern. I don't really see Ole Miss having any problems in all 3 of these games. I do expect them to go out there and take care of business in all 3 of these cupcake games. Middle Tennessee is not a bad Group of 5 team. I do expect that game to still be over 95%. It could switch to a 90% game for me by the time we do my predictions in the month of May, but I don't really see Ole Miss having any problems in all 3 of these non-conference games as of right now. So I think you can favor Ole Miss in all 3 of these games by more than 3 touchdowns. Let's now go to the next percentage, the 80% range, the blue games, the games where Ole Miss will be favored by a couple touchdowns. To be honest, though, when I look at the schedule, I don't really see any blue games here on this schedule for Ole Miss. So let's now skip ahead to the 60% games, the games where Ole Miss will be favored by at least a touchdown. And that's almost the majority of their schedule here. I got 6 of them on this schedule, and you got Wake Forest, Kentucky, South Carolina, Arkansas, Florida, and Mississippi State. I think Ole Miss will be favored in all 6 of these games by at least a touchdown. Wake Forest, with it being on the road, it's definitely a very tough one to call. It's definitely a purple game in my opinion. With it being on the road, South Carolina the same thing, Arkansas and Florida the same thing. And in Mississippi State, this is a rivalry, but playing at home, Ole Miss will be favored by at least a touchdown. And like I said, I was very close to putting that game as a 50-50 game. If it was on the road at Mississippi State, I would definitely put it as a 50-50 game. But as of right now, I'm going to stick with it and put it in the purple just because Mississippi State's starting a new era down there. They're having a new head coach this year. And I don't really know what to expect from the Bulldogs this year. Same thing with Arkansas and Florida. I don't know what to expect from those 2 teams. Arkansas and Florida are both very tough road games here. So that's the reason why I'm putting it in the purple. But if all these games that you're seeing in the purple on the road, like Wake Forest, South Carolina, Arkansas, and Florida, if all these games are at home for Ole Miss, I would definitely put it in the blue. Now, the Kentucky game was very close to being a 50-50 game, but I'm going to keep it with it and put it in the purple just based off of where Kentucky was last year. I think Ole Miss might be the better team, but like I said, both of these teams added some pieces in the transfer portal, and Kentucky, I think, is a team that can really be improved this year as well. So Ole Miss will be favored by at least a touchdown here against Kentucky. I mean, if it was on the road at Kentucky, I would definitely put it as a 50-50 game, in my opinion. So all 6 of these games, I think Ole Miss will be favored by at least a touchdown. All right, let's now go to the next category, the games where Ole Miss will be an underdog in. I don't have any red or orange games here in the 1% and 20% category, but I do have one underdog game on this schedule, and that is the game against Georgia here. I'm going to put this game in the yellow. I'm going to put Ole Miss as an underdog here against Georgia, a slight underdog here. With it being a home game, I definitely could see them having a really good opportunity to pull off an upset here, but it's really going to come down to the Ole Miss defense. If they can stop that Georgia offense from scoring a lot of points like they did last year, I think Ole Miss has a really good chance to win this game. But like I said, based off of where the game was last year and how based off it went, I'm going to put Ole Miss as an underdog here against the top-ranked team in Georgia. Not saying they're the top-ranked team in the country heading into this year, but it's really close to being like that this season for 2024. So I think they'll be a slight underdog against Georgia. And again, playing at home does give them some confidence going into that game. And then you look at the rest of the two games here. LSU on the road and Oklahoma here at home. These are pretty much your 50-50 games if you're an Ole Miss fan. The LSU game was a shootout. I do kind of expect it to be the same kind of game like it was last year compared to this year. And then Oklahoma, I don't know what to expect from Oklahoma in their first year in the SEC, but it's kind of hard to tell that this game is going to be a 50-50 game or not. But I'm going to stick with it and put it in the white for now. So I think Oklahoma will be a 50-50 game as well. I think both offenses are pretty talented. It's just going to come down to who has the better defense. So those two games, you kind of split those two apart. I'm going to say they win one of those two games here on the schedule, lose one, and then, win one. I think they probably lose to LSU perhaps. They could probably lose to LSU and probably beat Oklahoma at home. But let's say they beat LSU on the road, and then they lose to Oklahoma here on October 26th. So that's where you can split those two games. So yeah, those are my 50-50 games here for Ole Miss. Let's now get a projected record here for this Ole Miss team. So let's now get to a projected record. Again, this is not my official prediction. This is simply a projection based on how tough the schedule is. So we count the green games as wins, then you split those purple games. You kind of average those numbers out, and then you average the underdog game against Georgia, and then you split those 50-50 games and average those numbers out. You get an overall projected record for this Ole Miss team at 10-2 for 2024. So 10-2 comes out to be the projection here for Ole Miss. And again, you split those two 50-50 games. You at least, say they lose to Georgia there, and then you split those two games. One of those two games, they could probably lose their second game, and that could be to LSU or Oklahoma. So that's how the projection would come out to be 10-2. So 10-2 is my projection here for Ole Miss. I think best case scenario would definitely be 11-1, and I think 9-3 would definitely be worst case scenario. But I see this Ole Miss team being a really good team this year. Jackson Dart will, of course, be back at quarterback, and with your quarterback coming back at quarterback, that gives you confidence that Ole Miss could be a playoff contender coming up in 2024. So this is my projection here for Ole Miss. Let me guys know what you think about Ole Miss and their thoughts on their schedule down in the comments below. Give me your best case scenario and worst case scenario for this Ole Miss team down in the comments below as well. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports Channel.